Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking a deep dive into one of the most rapidly transforming and, honestly, strategically fascinating regions on Earth, the extreme north. We are unpacking the incredibly complex, constantly evolving relationship between China and Russia out in this icy frontier.
Okay, let's just dive right into this. For decades, the Arctic was basically this impenetrable frozen barrier. But as climate change accelerates and sea ice retreats, massive new shipping lanes and incredibly lucrative energy reserves are suddenly opening up. And this shifting environmental reality, it's bringing China and Russia together in the ice, kicking off a total flurry of new investments and a whole lot of international scrutiny.
Which brings us to the ultimate question we need to answer today. If you've been casually reading the headlines, you'd probably think a massive, monolithic new alliance is forming at the top of the world. But are we actually looking at a unified strategic bloc here? Or is this just a highly pragmatic marriage of convenience?
To figure that out, we're going to efficiently deconstruct this whole narrative step by step. We'll start by mapping out the new Arctic frontier, separate the myth from the reality of their partnership, and look at the actual hardware, the energy, and the icebreakers. Then we'll check out the security signaling, uncover the hidden friction in the freeze, and finally, zoom out to the global implications.
Starting off with Section 1. The new Arctic frontier, melting ice and emerging interests.
Look, we've got to move past our traditional view of the Arctic as just a cold, empty wasteland. Today, it is absolutely a hub of economic transformation. It holds an estimated 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and roughly 30% of its undiscovered natural gas. So the drivers of this relationship are a classic pace of complementary needs. Russia has the immense territory and the raw resources, but extracting them takes serious capital. China, meanwhile, is this hungry global energy consumer with the deep pockets and the infrastructure chops to make that extraction a reality.
Moving into Section 2, a pragmatic partnership, myth versus reality.
So let's break down those sensationalist headlines and look at how this relationship actually functions day to day on the ice. The crucial point is the dichotomy. Actually, scratch that. It's more like two interlocking puzzle pieces. Russia is the undisputed territorial boss in this equation. They hold all the regulatory authority and the geographic access. China isn't an Arctic state, but they bring the checkbook, the market demand, and the industrial tech needed to get these massive projects off the ground.
And this framework brilliantly highlights that this dynamic is fundamentally project-based. It is driven strictly by economic incentives and climate shifts. Make no mistake, this is not some formalized, all-encompassing military treaty. It's a very targeted alignment of mutual practical benefit.
Section 3. Energy and icebreakers. The action in the ice.
Let's shift our focus to the actual physical hardware and the projects where this partnership literally comes to life. The absolute flagship example here is the Yamal LNG project. When Western capital and tech pulled out because of sanctions, China stepped right in to fill that void. China's Silk Road Fund and their National Petroleum Corporation took a combined stake of nearly 30%, securing long-term energy supplies for themselves while keeping Russia's extraction efforts moving.
And seeing the physical assets that make this possible is just wild. You've got specialized ice-class LNG carriers built utilizing China's immense shipbuilding capacity, operating right alongside Russia's absolutely unrivaled nuclear icebreaker fleet, which shields those tankers and keeps the northern sea route open. It's the ultimate operational synergy.
Now let's do a quick data check, because the numbers are fascinating. International transit through the Northern Sea Route basically plummeted after the Ukraine conflict started in 2022. Yet, if you look at the total cargo volume, it actually hit a record 37.9 million tons in 2024. How does that work? Well, this massive growth is driven almost entirely by domestic Russian energy exports flowing directly to places like China.
Section 4. Science and security. Geopolitical signaling.
Economics is only one part of the story, right? We also have to look at how these nations project power in this incredibly fragile ecosystem. And when it comes to hardware, there is a staggering difference. China operates just 2 polar research icebreakers. 2! Russia operates 8 active nuclear icebreakers and 33 non-nuclear ones. When it comes down to who truly dominates these waters, the numbers speak for themselves. China is participating, sure, but Russia is definitively leading.
That said, if we objectively track their security alignment, we do see a rapid escalation. We went from joint naval exercises in 2022 and 2023 to July 2024, when Chinese and Russian strategic bombers conducted their first joint aerial patrol, even entering the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone. Then by October, their first joint Coast Guard patrol. This is a massive, very clear geopolitical signal to the West regarding their shared coordination up north.
Section 5. Friction in the freeze, the structural constraints.
Okay, plot twist time. Because despite those imposing headlines and the joint military patrols we just talked about, this partnership is actually heavily constrained. It turns out this relationship isn't always smooth sailing. For one, there's a huge strategic divergence. Russia wants tight, sovereign control over the Northern Sea route to collect transit fees. China, on the other hand, wants an open, global transit corridor. Toss in the extreme environmental risks, high financial barriers, and the heavy burden of international sanctions, and the path forward gets really complicated.
And a perfect real-world example of this friction is the threat of secondary sanctions. Recently, China's Wison New Energies decided to fully withdraw from supplying equipment to certain Russian projects, which severely complicates the massive Arctic LNG 2 project. It just goes to show you that Chinese firms aren't blindly pledging allegiance. They are actively and very cautiously weighing the financial risks of Western sanctions against the benefits of the Arctic.
Finally, Section 6. Global implications. A multipolar Arctic.
To wrap this all up, we really need to zoom out. What does this mean for the rest of us? Well, this accelerating activity forces two major global clashes. First, massive new infrastructure is threatening a fragile ecosystem, demanding stronger environmental safeguards that are super tough to actually enforce globally. Second, the rising presence of non-Arctic actors, like China, is openly challenging the authority of the established Arctic states. It's a classic clash between the old regional guard and new global players who are demanding a seat at the table. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought. As the ice melts, making this region more accessible, more lucrative, and way more contested than ever before, who will actually write the rules for the new Arctic? Will it be the traditional territorial powers, an expanded coalition of global economic giants, or some delicate shifting balance of both? It is a giant geopolitical puzzle that we're going to be watching very closely for